welcome to IDD Talks. I'm Anastasia Lavrina, and today we have a special guest in our studio, Ambassador Rodrigo Labardini, Diplomat-in-Residence, Professor of Practice in the Institute for Development and Diplomacy of Ada University. Welcome to IDD Talks.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. It's a pleasure to be here once again.
Thank you so much. And my first question, Caspian Sea serves both as a connector among and a divider between sub-regions. Today, however, as does the rest of the world, the Caspian Sea faces daunting environmental challenges. I know you published a lot of papers on this issue, so share with us your vision of the situation.
Well, first of all, you properly say that the Caspian Sea, what is the Caspian Sea? The basin, is there a difference? You also mentioned that it could be an interconnector or a divider. And then what could be those type of daunting challenges that we're talking about? The Caspian Sea, we all know it's this body of water. The first question that comes to mind is the Caspian Sea a lake or a sea?
That's a good question.
And the answer would be it's none. It's an endorheic basin, meaning it's a basin from which there's no outflow of water. That sounds like a lake, but no, it is not. A lake is just a large body of water, but it does not mean that water does not exit the lake. And this happens, for example, in the Great Lakes. You have the Superior, the Huron, all of them, and it comes, you fill a lake, and then it goes to another lake, it goes to another lake, it goes to another lake, to another lake, the 5 lakes, and finally it goes through the St. Lawrence River, comes to the ocean. So a lake does not mean just enclosed, which is another name for this type of basin, an enclosed basin, an endorheic. Simply, there's no outflow of water except by evaporation or maybe seepage, water going through it. An interconnector. Why? Because through history, we've seen that the Caspian Sea was a natural link between East and West. The caravans would not go through the sea. They were always around it, but they always knew it was there. They just go to the Caspian Sea and follow on that line. That brought Asia and Europe together. Also a divider, because it's such a large body of water, over 1,200 kilometers long, north-south, that it's a sizable chunk of water. And due to the size, there are certain stories, certain ideas indicating that it was called the sea due to its vastness. Mind you, it's long, but it's somewhat narrow, around 364 kilometers at its point. So it was a connector between cultures, between trade, but at the same time a divider. It is difficult to go beyond one or the other. Now, we also talked about the Caspian Sea. It's this body of water. But the Caspian Sea basin, that's a different concept. And by that I mean to say, if we think, where does the water come to the Caspian Sea? Does it just come by itself? That it comes just by clouds. It comes by clouds, some of them. But the water comes from the very distant origin, very close or distant from where the water comes from. It means that it comes through the river. And it could be a 167-kilometer river like the Sulak coming into the Caspian Sea, or it could be a river that is more than 3,500 kilometers away. That drop of water needs to move 3,500 kilometers in order to reach the Caspian Sea. So the question is the water from the Caspian Sea just its water? Or we need to include the basin. And I'll put an example in the U.S.-Mexico history. We all know about the Colorado River. The Colorado River is about 100 kilometers away from the U.S.-Canada border. And it measures something like 2,300 kilometers long. Of those, 167 are in Mexico. However, that amount of water in this one, they form the same basin. It's the same. Let me put it this way: if you put a mountain here and the water falls on the top, does the water come to the right or to the left? The moment you say it comes to the left side, this becomes one basin because that's where the catchment area is, and this becomes another one. So it shows that the water moves along in certain areas itself, and therefore the Caspian Sea would have a basin, its whole catchment area. And with the water, it's also, we need to also have a clear indication, and that's one of the papers that's coming up, is what is the concept of this water, of this international water? Because if it's just in my state, it's mine. But if it goes to another state, or if it's the border between both states, is it mine? Is it theirs? Is it ours? And I say this because let's assume this is the river, which is a border between you and me, and I put my hand into the water. Am I grabbing, am I touching my water? Well, yes, it's mine. But if you put your hand and you touch water, is it your water? Well, yes, but not really. It's really both, because we both share the river. Mm-hmm. And it could be a river that crosses the border, or it could be a river that serves as a border. In both cases, while the water was just in your territory upstream, when it crosses the border, it becomes mine downstream. So your water now becomes my water? No. We must understand that it's a concept that we need to digest, is that it's a common good. It's a transboundary resource. And there's several rules throughout the world in international law applicable to this situation.
Of course, if you use your part of the water, as you mentioned previously, the consequences, I will face them also after some time.
In fact,
that's why all 5 countries are responsible for what is happening in the Caspian Sea.
Since last century, since the 19th century, in fact, there's a case from last century called the Trail Smelter case between Canada and US, in which something was happening legal in Canada, however, in one of the countries, and then the fumes coming from the factory were affecting the other country. Is it legal, what they were doing? Yes, it was illegal, but the effects had consequences. So that's one of the principles in international law. In this case related to water, upstream countries have a duty towards downstream countries. Why? Because if something happens in the water I have in my river still, and the water just keeps on trickling down and crosses the border, if something happened here, I need to inform downstream, because maybe the water just became contaminated. Not my will, but something happened. And so therefore, this goes to the concept that the water is shared. In this case, in the Caspian Sea itself, we have 5 riparian states: Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran. But where does the water come from? From different rivers. There's over 130 rivers in the Caspian Sea draining into the Caspian Sea. And they come from very distant parts. One of them, the largest, is the Volga. But you have the Arak, you have the Kura, you have the Suluk. You have so many rivers coming. So we just need to find out where the water comes from, because it will come here. And now, while doing this research, we also saw this idea. We're thinking about the Caspian Sea water. Everybody's talking that it's desiccating, the level is lowering, but we also need to think about the consequences of that. And so we need to think about where the water is and the shape of the Caspian Sea. And that is because the bathymetry, by that I mean the shape of the underwater, of the seabed, that we do not know. We just see the flat surface. But we do know if that area is higher or going, if there's a mountain, if there's a hole, or what's going underneath. The shape of it is such that in the northern third part of the Caspian has an average of 5 meters deep. But the deepest part of the Caspian Sea is in the South Caspian Depression, which measures 1,025 meters. It's over 1 kilometer down deep. And that puts the first idea about the Caspian Sea issue, because it is estimated that it measures around 386,400 square kilometers. It's about the size, the surface, about the size of Japan or Germany, a little larger than California. So you can imagine the size. Now, everything of that is flat. When the sun hits on the water, this water evaporates. And the next question is, okay, it evaporates and it forms clouds. Where do these clouds drop their water? We don't know as of yet. The prevailing winds are mostly northwest, southeast. So probably go down to some part of Iran, maybe back to the Volga, back to Russia. But that means that's important, because as the water drops, there will be less surface. And if there's less surface to evaporate, there's less water. And if there's less water, it will mean that the water now will not be the same amount of water being dropped by clouds. Mm-hmm. And if the prevailing winds are northeast, south, northwest, southeast, then we can presume some way that the clouds are actually dropping the water maybe back to the Volga, where it came from. But if there's less water in the Caspian Sea, it will mean less water in the Volga. It will be a cyclic situation. And that means that we need to also not only care about the water itself or the pollution of the environment, but also just in the matter of preserving the water. Because this salty water evaporates and then drops its water somewhere else as sweet water.
Well, but the pollution, it's what the people themselves are doing. But the nature, what the process you explained, it's more about natural processes occurring. And then when it comes to the protection and intervention, how exactly you see this process?
It's part of it. I believe they're all human related, human activated somewhat. And by that I mean, if the water is dropping due to human causes, nature has less to work with. If there's less surface, there's less water. They're dropping less water, which is coming down to less water now, coming back to the Caspian. So if we need to preserve it. If it's polluted, well, that's an issue. If it's not environmentally protected or not protecting the environment sufficiently, that's an issue. But we can have environmentally protected water in large amounts or in small amounts, and we can have polluted water in large amounts or in small amounts. The one thing we do know, whether it's environmentally protected or polluted, if there's a smaller surface, there's less water to be evaporated from. And this brings the whole issue of the Caspian I was driving at. It is estimated, there are some calls right now stating that the Caspian Sea may drop by the year 2100. It may drop up to 18 meters, between 9 to 18. I've read some papers indicating, some scientific papers indicating that by year 2050, the northern third of the Caspian Sea will disappear because it only needs to drop 5 meters. And so that means it's a very large amount of surface because it's very shallow. Then it comes to the middle part, which is the Durban Depression, northeast of Bacchus, and then South Caspian way down there. So if everything drops down, it means it gets closer. It's a smaller size, which means less water, It's a whole cycle of that. So the effort would need to be to try to identify precisely, as close as possible, the amount of water today, to try just to preserve it. Even if polluted, but just to keep the water there. And that requires a lot of effort between all countries to try to coordinate.
Actually, that was my next question to you. The coordination between the Caspian states, how they can unite efforts, and according to the prognosis you just provided, which country you think should pay more attention to this issue? Altogether, that's fine. We understand this. The coordination is needed. But still, in which out of 5 countries the situation is more dangerous?
I would say that everybody is threatened by the same situation. If it's a common good, as I posited a little while ago, then it's a common threat. And I say that there's an estimated 14 million people living in the Caspian Sea area. There's some 6.5 I believe in Russia, some 2.2 here, some around in Iran, Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan having a lower amount. But it's still, if you imagine the water level dropping, it means that customs, traditions, economy will change dramatically. People that used to fish will not be able to fish anymore because the sea has dwindled so far away, it becomes impractical and there are no fish. There are some ideas about sea farming, saltwater farming or sea farming. Well, for that you still need salt water to have some farming. What would happen if the Caspian Sea moves so far away? What will they do? They will just have to survive, and for that matter, they will need to probably migrate. Where would they migrate to? They would migrate to some other part of the countries. But that's not just a focalized place. It means the whole region is affected. So we're talking about the Caspian Sea. You were mentioning the 5 riparian states. But if we're talking about a basin, we should probably be talking not about the 5, but about 9.
You mean also those countries from where those rivers you
where
mentioned?
the water is coming from.
Coming from, right.
And that would imply Turkey, Georgia, Armenia, and Uzbekistan. Because there's a small place, a real small corner. Why? Because it's the whole basin that if something happens to it, it will affect, probably likely themselves, depending on where the water from which the Caspian Sea is moving the clouds and the clouds are dropping, it will probably affect them as well. So it's a very sense of that. And sorry, could you pass me the bottle I brought with me? I forgot it to put it here. Thank you. What I was talking is, first I think we need to do in life is to have a reality check. And by that I mean, and everybody heard about this, is this bottle half empty or half full?
That's a good question.
Oh, don't worry. Everybody knows that if you say half full, it means you're optimistic. But if you say half empty, it's pessimistic. However,
right.
Let me do this. Is it half empty or half full now?
Almost full.
And I say no. It is the same amount of milliliters that the bottle has. It has not changed.
But the vision.
What matters is to know how many milliliters are there. Are there 375? Are there 400? And that way we know today what will happen with the water. If we know how much water we have today, then we can know how it is. And this shape also works well with the idea of the Caspian Sea. Because, if I put it like this, you will see that the surface measures just, around 4 centimeters in diameter. But down here, the same level would only measure maybe 1 centimeter, 1.5 centimeters.
1.5, yeah.
So if we say that it drops 1 meter here, or 1 inch, this is the amount of water, correct? 1 inch here is definitely not the same amount of water. It is way more amount of water up here.
All right.
So that means that the situation is even dire than we thought previously, because every meter that it drops on the top, it's a 386,400 square kilometers by a meter. Those are cubic kilometers. Here, it would only be, instead of, it's around 8 centimeters, and now here around 2. There's a lot of difference. This would be 8 centimeters in cubic. This is definitely, in order to do 1 drop here, you need to do maybe this amount of water is the same that happens here. And that happens in the Caspian Sea. If this desiccates so low, because the northern part is very shallow, it will drop just 5 meters. But if it keeps on shallowing, and there's the Durban Depression, which is smaller, but the South Depression, which is a lot deeper, it would eventually maybe come to 2 Caspian Seas, because this comes up and down. So that is what I'm talking about, the bathymetry. The shape of the sea also determines the volume of it. Thank you very much. And so to talk about the issue, we need to talk about the volume, what it is. And I say about even about perspectives, and they should all be welcome. I only ask this. Can you describe this object?
The pond, you mean?
Yes, describe it. And then people will tell me rectangular.
The black?
Black. There seems to be a little shiny thing, which I assume could be a camera. And I tell you, no, you're wrong.
Because from your side it's different?
It is all shiny. Are you wrong? Am I wrong? We're both right. We just have a different perspective of issues. And that's what we need to do here in the region, and almost any part, in any issues in general, because we need to see everything. The moment I realized that the Caspian Sea may be linked to other areas where they drop the water, maybe they go to India. I don't know where they dropped, where the water is being dropped. Maybe it goes back to the Volga. I don't know. We need to find that out to try to make the whole cycle identify. because there's a large, the surface of the Caspian Sea diminishes in size. As it drops, there will be less water to drop its water in clouds somewhere. That area.
So that's a global
will
issue.
Become drier. Yes. The final conclusion of this whole thing, and it seems odd, is that the Caspian Sea is linked to the world's environment. Why? Because it's so large that there's a lot of amount of evaporation going on and being dropped somewhere.
Well, then the key question, how the countries and the global community can work together to solve the issue, to prevent.
The first thing is I think we need to have a check reality and accept what reality is.
But I guess the countries already starting accepting that
They're
there is an
starting
issue
do
to work
that, yes.
with.
And I know about certain groups that are working between the 5 countries. We have the Tehran Convention in 2003, for example, that has been worked. There's some works also between the 5 riparian states to try to coordinate things. But we need to receive as much information, as much possibilities, as much ideas as possible, because by the example that I gave you right now, the situation is even dire. It's not just 1 meter. The 1 meter will become faster because the surface will be diminishing. So if the same amount of heat, 1 meter of 386,400 square kilometers will become shorter, but it will become deeper. The same amount of heat. So what to do is, as in anything in the world or in private relations as well, in order to solve a problem, first, we need to concur there is a problem. Secondly, what may be the roots? What do we have in our face, in our situation? And thirdly, try to devise ways between all of us, because it is not affecting me, it's affecting all of us. And therefore, whatever is being adopted should be adopted by all the countries involved.
Are there any concrete case studies with a similar situation which already been applied and can be useful for us?
I've seen some issues in Somaliland, in Eritrea as well, in which they're trying to use salty water to try to change. There are some ideas right now. One idea was called the Eurasia Canal, but that is wrong the way it's drafted because it's mixing waters. Another one is trying to maybe benefit from the fact that whereas the ocean waters, the world's oceans will be rising, the Caspian Sea will be dropping. So there's already a proposal about trying to be able to get the water diverted and dropped into the Caspian Sea in order to prevent the world's overflowing. If you're able to get the water here, then you can actually maybe lift off this. But I've seen proposals indicating that they would try to raise it by 50 meters high, and that would take around 76% of the world's problem away just on that matter. Sounds good. Of course, another issue is that the 5 riparian states, they need to be in agreement, because 50 meters, that's a humongous amount. I mean, you have a 10-story building, and let's give it just 3 meters per floor. That's only 30 meters. You still need to go 20 more meters high. It will be flooding the whole coastal areas. Should that be done? I find it a little extreme, but we need to figure the issue about the Caspian Sea, the riparian, the whole Caspian Sea basin, and the world at the same time. But that means that we all meet to the eye and we're all able to talk to each other.
Mr. Ambassador, I know you have a great experience of working as a diplomat. And let me ask one more question about geopolitics. We know about the problems existing between the Caspian states and some issues when it comes to the global politics issues. And you mentioned some problems, social problems, economic problems, which will affect the people in all countries if no any measures are taken right now. When it comes to geopolitics, do you think that the countries are ready to unite their efforts to work together? And if not, what are serious geopolitical consequences it will bring, not only to our region, but to the global world?
I'm certain that countries are always able to manage a way to survive, to find a way, but to define what the problem might be, What its solutions might there be? Do we replicate this in all the countries? Which are the countries affected? The Caspian, just to define the concept. And the first thing we need to do is to, again, I say, to identify the problem. And I say this because there are some people saying that in terms of geological terms of ages, the Caspian Sea has dropped, it has gone up. So they say, no, we're just in the phase of dropping up. And I say, well, maybe so. But in terms of 1 million years, maybe it's dropping. And 1 million years from now, we'll be going up. The only issue right now is the governments today have to solve the issues for the population. And if we just go by the last 121 years, we have dropped since the level of the water, the Caspian Sea level has dropped since 95, if I recall correctly, which was the most recent highest point. But we've gone beyond the lowest point we recall in 78, and we're now beaten that. So it could be a long stage, but people and governments and life has to be taken care of. It will have complications, definitely. As mentioned a little while ago, culture, fishing, traditions will change. The fishing issue, what type of work can a person do? You don't do what you traditionally. You need to learn new abilities. And that sounds good. Where? If the fish, they're dead, we cannot eat salt. We cannot eat sand. We need something. So maybe the idea of drinking water could be something, but that's a problem also because at the same time, if you bring more salted water, as it may come from the Sea of Azov over the way over here, it's more saline. It will affect the environment locally. There's too many issues at the same time. Migration will definitely be part of life. The point is, we need to have different perspectives, as I mentioned a little while, and be open to any idea in order to try to coordinate between all countries involved. And I'm not saying the Caspian Sea riparian or the basin, because if the Caspian Sea is truly connected to the world's environment, then this becomes truly a world's issue.
Right. Mr. Ambassador, thank you. Thank you so much for joining the program today. It was a real pleasure to know more about the situation in the region around the Caspian Basin, Caspian Sea, how it's being also called, and the consequences it may have for the future, for the global world. Thank you so much.
On the contrary, Nastasia, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your audience. And keep watching IDD Talks.